If you want your son to understand courage without recklessness, strength without being cruel, and the value of individual achievement in conjunction with working with a team, these are 3 books that you should add to your shopping list today. One quick disclaimer, we are not talking about picture books here. These are for young people aged roughly 12 to 18 who are ready to contend with real ideas. But if your son is over 18, well, these are still some of my favorite books that I go back to today. The first and most essential of these books is Endurance by Alfred Lansing. Endurance is the true and frankly nearly unbelievable story of Ernest Shackleton's journey through Antarctica. At the time, Shackleton was a famed captain and researcher who dreamed of completing the first trans-Arctic crossing in world history, this being 1914, well before the days of telephones, electricity, radar, or even metal ships. With a hand-picked crew, Shackleton set out in a wooden ship built specifically for the journey ahead, a journey which would quickly become far longer than they'd ever intended. After several bouts of bad, unpredictable weather, the Endurance was left trapped in Antarctic ice. For the better part of a year, Shackleton and his men survived trapped in the ice, conserving their resources by hunting seals for food and oil, and waiting for the day where the thaw would drop their ship back into the ocean. But instead, the weather became worse, and in just under a year after they became stuck, the men were forced to abandon their ship in the middle of the night as it was crushed by moving ice and sent to the bottom of the ocean. And that's where their real journey began. Endurance is one of the most incredible feats of human survival ever recorded, and Lansing is a brilliant writer. Working off of the journals that the men kept at the time, and with his own direct style that leaves room for suspense and for beauty, Lansing spins a tale that has captured readers' minds for generations. I'm going to deviate from my script for just a moment to tell you that one of my classmates once picked up the book at my recommendation and told me, "Oh, I didn't like this book. I felt cold and wet the whole time, and I didn't know if they were going to survive. It just really made me feel uncomfortable the whole time I was reading it." And then they didn't finish it. They said, "I felt cold and wet and isolated. I didn't see how they could possibly survive." Well, yeah. That's exactly why it's so important to read it, especially for a young man. This is a real story of the indomitable human spirit, and reading about these heroes while curled up under our blankets is like looking through a peephole into the story of our brave ancestors, a visual of what they could do, but also of what we are capable too, if we're pushed to it. Before we go any further, hi everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Aaron, published fiction writer and former writing and rhetoric professor. Thanks so much to the 931 of you who have already subscribed. As soon as we hit 1,000 subscribers, we're going to be doing our first random book giveaway. All you need to do to enter into that giveaway is make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave a comment below this video. If you're randomly selected, you'll be able to choose any one of the books that we've gone over on any one of my videos, and I'll send it to you free of charge. Now, let's dive into the second book. The second book on this list is Siddhartha. Now, some of you may ask, isn't that a religious book? Great question with a firm answer. No, it is not. Though our protagonist comes into contact with ancient religious figures, this is definitely not considered to be a religious book. Siddhartha is the story of a young man in India born to a very wealthy family who is smart, well-off, good-looking, but can't quite figure out what he's passionate about and what the real answers are to the major questions of life. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What am I meant to do? And so Siddhartha ends up leaving home with his best friend to go out into the countryside and find out, what does real life look like? How do people live, and what is it that I want to choose to do with this one life that I have? On his journey, Siddhartha and his friend come across the Buddha. And what Siddhartha learns while observing the Buddha is that while the Buddha is clearly an enlightened individual, Siddhartha himself cannot take the Buddha's enlightenment any more than he can gain energy when somebody else eats food. That is, it's the Buddha's experiences specific to him that have led to his enlightenment. And for Siddhartha to spend his own life in worship following the teachings and ideas of another man, he would lose the opportunity to do what the Buddha actually did, to stride out into the greater world and experience it on his own terms. You can only gain wisdom through experience by living your own story. And so even though Siddhartha's best friend is enthralled by the Buddha and decides to stay and be a Buddhist and worship the Buddha, Siddhartha bids him farewell and continues on his own journey. Siddhartha's path eventually leads him into the city, where he first begins to learn about the world of material wealth. And this is where his life takes two turns. First, he meets the beautiful Kamala in the gardens and has what I believe is one of the most important conversations that all boys should have, but one of the most common ones that they miss. The difference essentially between sex and love, paying for it and not paying for it, and the emotional damage given and taken if a man were to ever harm a woman. I'll interject here and say that the conversation between them goes very well, but it's really important for all of the ideas to actually be stated out loud, to be experienced by the reader. Kamala inspires Siddhartha to abandon much of his earlier desires for enlightenment, opting instead for a life of riches and hedonism in the city, where he works as hard as any man to grow wealthy. And Siddhartha does grow wealthy. He's smart and good looking, he has good conversations, and eventually he's able to amass himself a fortune through lots of hard work and through many, many years of his life. But over time, Siddhartha finds himself emptier than he ever has been. And eventually, only after he's gained all the wealth he could ask for and all the comfort for himself, does he have the wisdom to know why he should abandon his wealth and his station if he is to truly find his purpose, like what he wanted when he was a boy. This book was written by Herman Hesse and exemplifies Eastern rather than Western ideology regarding coming of age from the lens of a Westerner, which is a very interesting mix that we don't often get. At the university, much of my own pedagogical work has focused on coming of age stories from the West and the East, the progressive developmental stages of both boys and girls, and the forming of experiences and structure that allows for a healthy transition into adulthood. While the East and West offer many different, we'll say, temperaments, values, and structures, coming-of-age stories are often remarkably the same across different cultures and civilizations. Almost like similar stories told with different fonts and different tones. That is, when you really boil them down past the skin and the meat all the way to the bone. And that takes us northwest, to a rural, heavily wooded, gorgeous island nation that is Old England, for our third book, The Once and Future King. The Once and Future King is a retelling of the story of England's most famous king, Arthur. This retelling by T.H. White is, well, really funny. It's lighthearted at the beginning, suspense-filled and gritty in the middle, and of course, tragic at the end, but in a beautiful way. A way that inspires hope for a future that will exist long after the heroes of the story are gone. White takes the classic La Morte d'Arthur and transforms it from a story that often feels like an encyclopedia or a history into a rich, three-dimensional tale of growing up, discovering personal and communal values, and establishing one's will in the attempt to make the world better. It's one of the best representations of Western values you can find, as in a book like this, you can draw a clear distinction between good and evil, all while the very human problems can remain murky. We have some honorable mentions here. The Road by Cormac McCarthy is a fantastic and sparse story of the quest for individual survival against catastrophic odds in a chaotic world, written in beautiful prose. The only reason for its exclusion is that it's a difficult subject matter, and you might get more out of it if you read it when you're older. Another honorable mention is Old Man and the Sea, considered to be Hemingway's masterpiece. A beautifully simple book about the connection between life and struggle and the brotherhood shared by all living things in the world. And finally, one of my personal favorites, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, which I do plan to cover in future videos, but I don't want to sound too lectury. It's a massive tale of several Americans in the age of Western expansion, meant to use the biblical story of Cain and Abel as a metaphorical framing device. Honest, brutal, and powerful, I still think this is a book for folks who are, only ready for it. If you're not used to reading classics, it's just a really tough one to get through right away and even harder to finish, but it is one of the brilliant works of American literature and absolutely worth reading. The last thing we'll talk about is, what order should you give your son these books? I'd say start with Endurance when he's 12 to 14, ready to test his physical limits and his imagination. Give him Siddhartha at 15 to 17, when he's beginning to question everything, to date, and to make some choices that you might not be happy with. And give him The Once and Future King when he's around 16 to 18, when he's ready to begin deciding what kind of man he wants to be in relation to the world, in relation to the people around him, and in relation to the society that he finds himself born into and growing up in. Thanks so much for watching. Again, make sure you're subscribed and leave a comment so you can be entered into that free book giveaway. Make sure you're drinking enough water and getting enough sleep, and I'll see you next week. Take care.